all. We have quite the evening planned for all of you. We have quite the evening planned for all of you. Uh, Today, we are actually going to be interacting with some of the industry leaders from the private sector, talking to them about how to integrate sustainability in the private sector. And on this journey, we're going to be discussing some things that are very important for all of us to understand. Sometimes we do not give it enough thought, and sometimes we do give it enough thought and still look for answers. So that's what we'll try and achieve through the panel discussion. But like all good things, you'll have to wait for the panel discussion that's happening a little later. We will start with giving you an introduction about the GPODS Fellowship, under whose aegis we're organizing this event, and we keep on organizing these events. So I request you to go to our website and subscribe so that you can get notifications for all of these events. Like all good panel discussions, introductions, whether that's virtual or otherwise, I must start by introducing myself. My name is Ishan Chaturvedi. As you can see, I am the Joint Director of the Global Policy, Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship Program. I hold a master's in environmental law and policy from Stanford University. And GPODS is something that we have been working on for quite some time. And on this wonderful journey, where we have some of the family members in the audience, actually, some of the past fellows I can see in the audience.
Yep.
Over the short journey of 1 year, we have been able to gather over 100 fellows and over 100 fellows who are for all intents and purposes, leaders of the future. And we're very proud of the bunch that we have. And we're also very proud of the bunch that we are now collecting onto our next fellowship cohort. So the next fellowship cohort starts on the 2nd of October. The deadline ends in exactly 3 days. So if any of you are interested in applying for the GPOD fellowship, this is the right time to do it. Some of the panel discussions, some parts of the discussion that we will be having today is very detailed during the fellowship. So we cover sustainability, public policy, international relations, all of those things. And we'll be giving you a brief snippet. If you are on the fence, we'll try and convince you to at least apply or check us out if you can. On this note, it'll also be nice of me to welcome Arpit. Arpit,
Sure.
if you can use yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Ishan. So, hi guys, my name is Arpit Chaturvedi. I'm the co-director of the fellowship. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Global Policy Insights, which is a think tank based in New Delhi, London, and New York. And Global Policy Insights is one of the co-sponsors of the fellowship, along with Envipol, which is a New Delhi-based consulting firm, and the UN South-South Cooperation's associated network of NGOs and CSOs. To give you my background, I have donned many hats. I still do don many hats. I'm a graduate of Cornell University, where I completed my master's in public administration. Some of you must have seen me, or some of you must have reached out to me seeking advice for admissions, seeking feedback on your statements of purposes. So Ishan and I do it very gladly. We are, that's one of our favorite things to do. Everybody has their own co-curriculars and extracurriculars. That happens to be ours. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have all of you, and I'm looking forward to this discussion about the GPODS Fellowship, and after that on sustainability in the corporates. And there we are going to be talking about things like how much of it is just words, how much of it is real action, how much of it is about sustainability, and is it anything different from degrowth, things like that. So hold on for a bit. We'll talk to you about this exciting opportunity, the GPODS Fellowship. You'll have all of the links coming in onto the chat box. You can, ask us questions if you have questions about the fellowship. And if you are a person who is interested in any of the areas that we are talking about, then please feel free to reach out to us, because we typically get a lot of good responses and success stories out of our fellowship of people who have really been able to learn and take their careers to the next level after doing this. So with this now, may I request Shrishti to share the screen, Shrishti or Aditi to share the screen. Thanks, Aditi. And here we start talking about the GPODS fellowship. So essentially,
before we go ahead, let me also give a couple of housekeeping rules in
sure.
order. So first of all, guys, we have the chat box closed right now, but we'll be opening it in the last 15 minutes of our discussion on GPODS. As soon as this discussion ends, we'll start with the panel discussion with and I just want to give you all a snippet of what we have in store for the panel discussion before we go ahead with our discussion of the GPODS fellowship. So we're being joined by Ms. Swati Vasudevan, who is the former Deputy Director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation India. We're being joined by Mr. Anish Dey, who is the Global Head of Power and Energy for KPMG. We're being joined by Mr. Abhishek Bhatia, who is the Partner and Director of Boston Consulting Group India, BCG. And we're also being joined by Mr. Surajit Bose, who's the Assistant Vice President of Hindustan Coca-Cola Industries. So we will be discussing private sector, integrating sustainability in private sector, and that's to come later. I would request all of you to hold your breath as we discuss the nuances of the GPODS fellowship. Again, I just want to connect the two sessions today, the one where we're discussing the GPODS fellowship, and right after that, the one where we'll be joined by these global stalwarts. The idea is that such discussions happen very frequently in the fellowship. So if you're drawn towards sustainability, how the private sector works, or in the very least, connecting with people such as the global stalwarts that we have for our panel discussion today, please do check out the GPODS fellowship. Again, we've put the details on the chat box. And we'll also be circulating our personal email IDs. We're happy to converse with you if you have any clarifications that you need. All right, over to you, Arpit.
Sure. So essentially now, I'm happy to talk about this also because it was exactly an year ago when we started out talking about the GPODS fellowship and we launched it to the world. So in a way, we have come a long journey. We have come to a journey where we have graduated about 100 fellows. We have worked with about 150 mentors. We've engaged with a total of 50 plus countries. GPODS fellowship was essentially an idea that was born in COVID. This was an idea that was born out of a realization that a lot of public policy education in India was very internally focused. It was not looking at the needs of how things are changing around the world. This was also the time when Ishan and we had just returned from attending a very buzzing Davos at the World Economic Forum. And we had an increasing feeling, since we both were working in the policy sector, in the legal sector, we had an increasing feeling that a majority of the employers, a majority of the officials, all of them felt that there is something missing in the Indian education ecosystem, especially when it came to public policy. And I'm sure Ishan would talk a lot more about sustainability, but I was, I have taught public policy at the San Francisco State University. I was also teaching public policy in India. And we realized that there were not enough global interactions, not enough global exposure. And a lot of times there were just the same, bunch of 10 people who were teaching in all of the colleges in India. And we realized that, this has to change, because if we keep educating the next generation with the same sort of content and from the same sort of people who have created a system with which we are so dissatisfied with, if they are the folks who are educating the next generation, then we are again going to have the same system all over again replicated out from them. So that was the first impetus. The second impetus was obviously COVID, because this was also the time where many of the people whom we knew were not able to go out and study. For those who were, applying for LLM or MPP degrees, and they wanted to really go out, and there were financial burdens, there were, other travel restrictions, etc. And we started thinking that it doesn't to be, an education that gives you those sort of opportunities and that sort of an exposure doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive. And we thought of launching something like GPODS. The third thing that we wanted to address was that public policy schools, especially, not just in India, but I'd say the whole of Asia, a lot of public policy schools are devoid of understanding diplomacy and sustainability as well. And similarly, diplomacy schools don't have to do so much, IR schools don't have to do so much with sustainable development and public policy. And we really thought that until and unless you bring all of these three things together, you cannot really find solutions to your problems, to the problems that you are facing. Because look at any problem that we have. Look at the problem of air pollution. Is it a sustainability problem? Yes. But is it a public policy problem? Certainly, because you could either put a tax on industries that pollute. You could absolutely ban polluting industries. You could do a cap and trade sort of a mechanism that you could trade for carbon credits. There are a number of policies to choose from when you want to address climate change. Now, how do you want to choose these policies? That is defined by the politics, that is defined by diplomacy. You have to, even if you're doing cap and trade, then you have to deal with other countries. You have to come into contracts with and agreements with other nations. So that was the whole Kyoto Protocol and, all of the genesis for this. So it needs a lot of political and diplomatic maneuvering as well. And you cannot be that person that today you could say that no, I'm a public policy person, and if there's something diplomatic or there's something political, then no, I'm not going to jump into this. So that's when you don't get problems solved. And we wanted to create this cross-disciplinary experience over a short span of time, 3 months, because we really think that a deep dive is possible in that sort of a time. Which is absolutely global in its nature and looks at the interconnections of these three things. And that's how the GPODS Fellowship was born. Okay, so we'll move to the next slide. Sure. So let's come to the slide next after this. Yeah. So as I said, this is a 3-month-long international online fellowship program. It has 3 tracks. I'll be talking about those 3 tracks. They are broadly public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability. We have 5 workshops, and each of the fellowship hosts about 40 plus mentors. Sometimes there are even 50 plus mentors coming in. Next slide, please. So essentially, what do we want out of this fellowship? What is the end state where we want to reach? The end state where we want to reach is that what we realize is that the current crisis that we are living in, more than anything, it's a crisis of leadership. It's a crisis of cooperation between people who can make a difference. And our idea over here is to create a network of leaders across the world, not just in developing countries, but also developed countries, who can, pick up the phone, who can say that, okay, we can, talk beyond politics. We need to get these things done. And we will get these things done not through, brute political maneuvering, but through our knowledge based on public policy, diplomacy, and sustainability. And I'm quite happy to say that we are already working towards creating a global network of leaders. I have been meeting a number of fellows in the past few weeks since, people have started going out a little in lockdown, and people have started also thinking that there's probably another lockdown coming in. So I am meeting fellows from India who are now working remotely for a design and policy firm in Slovakia. I'm meeting people in India who are working with a tech and sustainability firm in the US. I'm, and I see so many pictures of our other fellows across the world, and so many, of them starting book clubs or starting, projects, or getting into GIZ, etc., or getting into government positions. meeting and getting things done on these fronts. And that essentially is the vision for what we do. And how we do it is the mission. And how we do it is that we interact, we immerse, we involve, and we evolve. And what does that mean is that our first thing is the community that we build at our fellowship. It is a global network of mentors and a global network of fellows. So it's almost like, a 3-month global, almost an Ivy League sort of a program. The other thing is that once you are a fellow, you are always a fellow. Then you'll be invited for various events. Like we are hosting our alumni for the New York Climate Week, and they'll be speaking in the New York Climate Week very soon. So all of those things make you a part of a community for life. The second thing that we have is immerse, and we really deep dive into building knowledge. We really deep dive into building skills that would be needed in the industries and in the working force of tomorrow. And we involve our community in various things, right from meetings with corporates to interacting with governments, doing projects with multinationals, doing projects with international NGOs like Space Foundation or UN-based agencies, etc., etc. And we hope that this network would evolve over time, and that's what we keep doing over and over again, just to make sure that we are doing our vision. So next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said that we've had a number of fellows from all over the world. I'm sure that this is not an updated map, but then
yeah, I was just going to say that this map is about 6 months old, I think.
Yeah,
it needs updation.
It looks a lot more yellow.
But the idea is it's only representational, guys, because one of the key takeaways from the fellowship is the kind of network you develop and the network that you have currently, as you hear me speak and hear Arpit speak, and later the speakers, the people from the private sector speak. You have to get outside the network that you already have, and at GPODS that has to have a global dimension. That's what we pursue, and that's what we try and provide for all of our fellows.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a lot of research which says that if you have a diversity of networks, then you are more likely to become a CEO earlier in your life. If you have a diversity of networks, you're more likely to have a more profitable business. If you have a diversity of networks, you're more likely to become a leader in your own nation or community, etc. So our idea is simply this, that with diversity of networks, you'll get diversity of information, and that gives you not just the same old stale opportunities and news about opportunities. It gives you a lot more than what you would otherwise get. So next. Cool. So our fellowship is essentially based on I told you content wise, it's based on 3 pillars, which was policy, diplomacy, and sustainability. Now, structure wise, our fellowship is based on 3 primary things that you see on the screen. One is courses, another is workshops, and the third one is mentorship. And all of these 3 pillars, they are there for a specific purpose. So courses are there to build knowledge, workshops are there to build skills, and mentorship is there to give you the networks and give you the exposures that you need. So let me start talking about the workshops first, because workshops are there to build your most immediate skills, that is to make you market ready. And this came from a number of discussions, a number of focus group discussions that we had with leaders from governments, NGOs, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies when we were at the World Economic Forum Davos. And there we realized that over and over again, a theme emerged that leaders thought that there are certain skills that the workforce currently is lacking, and there are certain skills that would be needed more of as we get into the 4th industrial revolution, with a lot of tech doing routine work that would replace human beings. And those skills that would be more and more required for human beings to perform were effective writing and communication. That was a very, very, very important skill. And you'd be surprised to know how few people are actually comfortable in writing and in communicating freely. Now, I'm proud to say that our mentors our fellows are invited as, evaluators of writing competition. But then it takes you a while to evolve into that person who can, and we have a very unique approach to teaching how to write and communicate. It's through a lab, essentially, and we can talk a lot more about that. But then other skills which were needed were
Arpit, before we go ahead, I just also want to specify that when we're saying writing, guys, this is not creative writing or basic writing that we're speaking of. We're talking about policy writing. So how do you draft policy statements, statements that have that are opinion-making statements around the globe? So how do you do
policy briefs, policy memos, articles that you can publish? In fact, we encourage our fellows to work with us. We edit those articles. We help them get those articles published. So that's a huge part of our fellowship, essentially. So those are the kind of things that we work on. Then we inevitably have a series of workshops on fundraising and grant writing from a not-for-profit perspective. So if you're a non-profit leader, then there's a section of the workshop that caters to that. The other is from a social entrepreneurship, a for-profit perspective, where you get towards angel investors, you go to your Series A, Series B, etc. So fundraising and grant writing was the number 2 skill that we understood after all of these focus group discussions, that this would be needed everywhere, irrespective of the industry that you're working in, whether you're in the private sector or in the government or in non-profit. The third was systems thinking, which is how do you make sense of complex, adaptive, evolving systems, and how do you join the dots and understand where the problem really lies in the system, and rather than changing the whole system, you address that problem very specifically. And we also apply a lot of these systems thinking and other frameworks to a series of case studies which are focused on public policy and climate change. And the good thing over here is that a lot of times you'll go to business schools or you'll even go to policy schools, and the case studies that you work on will be focused on, they'll essentially be business case studies. And what we do is that one of our mentors, Valentina, who comes from Italy, she gives you a battery of case studies that is talking about cases ranging from the problem of sanitation in New Delhi to public participation in Brazil. So they'll give you some grounded public policy case studies which have all of the right political, all of the right policy and financial angles to it. And you have to solve those case studies along with your teams. In fact, as part of the case study workshop this time, we were also able to have one negotiation session hosted by the US Department of State, and they have a National Museum of American Diplomacy. So you literally had the US government's Department of State coming in and teaching the art of negotiation in our case study workshop this time. We have, another workshop on circular economy, because that has increasingly become a skill. So you need to actively start thinking of your business models, of your business processes, of your other bureaucratic processes in circular terms, wherein you're nearing zero waste, and there's a lot of recycling of energy, resources, etc., etc. So that in itself is a skill that you need to practice, and we have workshops on that. And in fact, this time we have an additional workshop which you don't see over here, but we have a workshop on program design and evaluation. And that increasingly has come up as a skill wherein you'd need to understand how do you do your logical frameworks, how do you, what's the difference between monitoring and evaluation, what's the difference between an output and an outcome. So all of these things you learn from some of the best folks around the world. So we have folks coming in from Cornell, from Stanford, Cambridge, Oxford, etc., etc. And those are the folks who will be teaching you all of these things. Now, coming to the courses, we have 3 of them in each of our 3 focus areas. So comparative public administration is the public policy course. That's the course that I teach, and it's about, how certain policies work in certain countries. You cannot just copy paste policies into your own country, but that also doesn't mean that you can not tweak policies from other countries and tailor it to your own context. So where's that balance? How is the healthcare system, for example, in India different from the US and Germany? Those are the kind of things. It's a methodological course, and those are the kind of things that we discuss. The second course is International Political Economy and Diplomacy, and this is again a course that a bunch of our colleagues from Cambridge, LSE, and Cornell teach, and this is about how economics impacts politics and vice versa, and how is the art of diplomacy conducted on a global scale. And then there's one lecture which talks about how does it transpire from the global to the national to the local scale. So those are the things that we do. And Ishan can talk about the Global Commons seminar because that's the one he teaches over there.
Yeah, no bias, I promise you guys. The idea behind the global seminar series on sustainability and climate change is that everyone today, including some of us in this gathering, have our interests aligned with, say, a climate finance, right? Or have our interests aligned with international relations, diplomacy from an environmental perspective, right? Or some of us are working in waste management systems and running our civil society organizations and NGOs. The idea of this course itself is to not assume that you know about sustainability in a way that you're already an expert, and also not only concentrate on one of these factions of sustainability. So some of the ones that I mentioned, from climate finance to risk modeling, to climate modeling, to risk assessment, to ecosystem services, to sustainability organizations, to public health and climate change, all of these things are discussed within the course. It is absolutely tailor-made for some of you or some of us who are also at the cusp of wanting to get into sustainability. So it's not only for sustainability professionals. In fact, let me also take this moment to answer one of the most FAQ of them all, the most frequently asked question that we get. As one of our fellows has told us, this is too good to be true, so is this a scam? And I assure you, this is a well-established fellowship for quite some time. Some of our fellows are in the audience, and you should either connect with them on LinkedIn, or we're also happy to provide connections to them directly. The second most obvious question that would come to you is, can I be a fellow, right? And that is a very important question to ask yourself. To answer your question, everyone can be a GPODS fellow. We do not require you to hold a certain degree or a certain level of graduation, or to be coming from a certain background. Over the past 3 cohorts, we've had ages 18 to 56 represented. We've had over 25, 30 countries from which fellows have participated. We've had anthropologists, biologists, environmental lawyers, whom I have a soft spot for, public policy professionals, politicians, data analysts,
current diplomats, historians, and airline pilots.
I'm assuming Arpit's Chetli in the audience. I think she's here. And also a lot of consultants, because I know that we are going to be discussing our integrating sustainability in the private sector, the panel discussion that is to follow with the stalwarts of BCGs and KPMGs. So a lot of consultants have also been a part of our cohorts over the past year or so. So it's open for all, and that's something that I want to be absolutely clear about. What is it that you require to do? You just need to log on to www.gpods.org, go to the Apply Now tab, submit your 500-word SOP. We do not want you to pour your heart out. Half a page is good enough. Submit your resume. If you have any writing samples or recommendation letters, well and good. Otherwise, you're through, and then a decision will be taken. Again, I just want to point out, because we are in the last days of the application deadline, so our applications close on the 15th. The earlier you apply, the better it is for us. So
Yeah.
for the selection company especially. So that's the idea. But that's the courses, and that's who all can apply. More importantly, GPODS is different from any other master's level course or graduate level course generally, or any academic course, because it isn't just a fellowship that offers courses. It also offers, as Arpit has already told you, courses and workshops, but it also offers mentorship. And we take great pride in the mentors that we have coming from all around the globe. I'll request Aditi to move the slide because we have a dedicated slide for mentorship, team building, and applied learning. So I'll come to that. We can skip over these. Arpit has already covered these. So what is mentorship? Mentorship is not training. It's not coaching. Mentorship is taking an inherent, innate interest in where you're heading with your life. It could be professional life, it could be academic life. And that's where mentorship comes in. So over the past cohorts, and we'll showcase some of our mentors to you as well. We've had various mentors, Supreme Court judges from various countries, the Assistant Secretary Generals of the United Nations, members of parliaments from various countries, sitting and former diplomats from various countries come along and become a mentor at the fellowship. So they deliver a guest lecture. But again, that's only one portion of the mentorship. A lot of the times, mentorship simply entails someone coming, delivering a lecture, going off, and then you never hear from them, or they never hear from you. We are revising, innovating here. So the mentorship does not end with a guest lecture where the person, the global stalwart, global leader, comes and speaks to you about their experiences. It starts at that point. Then they have a dedicated interactive office hour with all of you, all of our fellows. And that's where it's a space, and I'm sure some of the fellows will vouch for this, where you can talk about your academic pursuits, your professional pursuits. So, for example, Miss Swati Vasudevan, who was one of our panelists later, the former Deputy Director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you could have an office hour with her, as it was the case, because she's been a mentor to the fellows. And you could ask her that, listen, I want to end up working here. How do I approach my career path? I want to do research in this space. Where do I go from here? And that's the advantage of having mentors, not lecturers, not people who come and take sessions for you, mentors. And that's where mentorship comes in. In fact, I'm very proud of the fact that a lot of our fellows over the past few months have connected with these mentors, had their Zoom meetings, have their articles edited and whatnot in the fellowship. So that's one portion of the cohort. But so as you can see, mentorship is information exchange, knowledge exchange, but it is also networking for our fellows. They get to interact on a personal level with these global stalwarts that we'll see. It is also the GPODS fellowship is also about vertical networking, because with the mentors, with the kind of global leaders who come as mentors, you're networking vertically. You're networking with people who are a couple of decades ahead in their professional lives than you are. Horizontal networking is when you go outside your comfort zone and interact with your peers. So if you could go to the next slide, what we do is we also arrange international mixers with other people, other colleges, other universities, institutions across the globe. And we put our fellows directly in touch with their contemporaries from all of these institutions and peers. And I invite you to check out our social media and our website to know where all we have conducted these. To give you a little idea of the kind of mentors we have, it'll be impossible to go over all of them, but we have Mr. Arun Maira. Arpit, I don't know if you'd like to take a couple of these as well. But we've had global leaders, and these are the fellows for the next cohort, for which hopefully you'll be applying in the next couple of days if you haven't already.
Sure, absolutely. And I think there's just one thing to be said about the mentorship, as Ishan said, that it's not just something that's a touch and go. It's not just something that, you interact with the mentor once and you never meet them again. In fact, this is your chance to sit face to face during the office hours, which are, private, non-recorded, small group sessions with the mentors to talk about things like, hey, I saw about this opening and this has been, my approach towards writing the cover letter. Can you just take a look at it? Or, how do you go about getting into the World Bank or to the Asia Development Bank or in BCG or in the UN? And the idea over here is that you are talking to a person who has done that. Or if you're a person who's planning to apply for a master's or a PhD program, you can explore ways to work with the mentors on projects so that eventually they might be willing to write a letter of recommendation for you. You might just be able to understand which colleges should you apply for, because a majority of these mentors would be, either faculty members or, professors of practice or alumni of a lot of these, top institutions across the world. So, we see, for example, now two of our fellows are going to be in the final round of interview for the World Bank Young Professionals Program. And I see a lot of people coming in and telling me that, I've always dreamt of working in the UN. I've always dreamt of working in the World Bank. And this is your chance literally to, just chat with the Assistant Secretary General of the UN for hours and hours together and understand what their journey has been. And not just one of them, but with multiple of them at the same time. So I think that is the sort of opportunity that we are, bringing for our community over here.
So if we could move on to the next slide, guys, we're just going to rush through this because we have a panel discussion starting in the next couple of minutes. We have someone like Nikhil Seth. Mr. Nikhil Seth is the director of UN. He's actually at the rank of UN Assistant Secretary General again, though, as Arpit was mentioning. And he's the Secretary General and Executive Director of UNITAR, which is where all the information training exchange happens within the United Nations system. Again, we'll keep going through these slides, so I'll invite Aditi to keep going. We have Mr. Gaurav Dalmia, so from the private sector, United Nations, civil society organization. You see Ms. Monica Rabi, who's from the World Wildlife Fund, and a bunch of other mentors who come from all parts of life, all walks of life. And you could also check out these profiles on our website, as Arpit has mentioned. So these are only some of the fellows that, some of the mentors that we've had, and some that we'll be having. If we could move on to the next slide, so we could quickly discuss the horizontal networking that I was talking about. So guys, if you are a GPODS fellow, you are a part of a very select group of people who have been handpicked from across the world. So it's not just, remember, you are as much as a resource for the other person as you find the other person to be, because you come from a very, very select group of people, which are the GPODS fellows. So you have the opportunity to interact amongst each other, both in terms of your cohort and the past cohorts. And this is something that we facilitate, or we try to facilitate almost unendingly. You also have a separate WhatsApp group on WhatsApp, where you can interact with other fellows. But also we have interactive happy hours, as I mentioned, which are sessions where you could, grab a cup of coffee or whatever is your poison and interact with your fellows. You also have game nights. So we organize a bunch of game nights for all the fellows as a group bonding session. In fact, I'm not sure if we're being joined by one of our past fellows, Alif, who used to who used to conduct this horror game for all the fellows to participate in. And that was a team building exercise in itself. We've had international mixers with Copenhagen Business School, with King's College London, and a bunch of other universities across the globe, where we have put our fellows in touch with their contemporaries, as I mentioned. And then we have this very novel sort of an idea, which is where we generate a Zoom 24/7 Zoom link that is only available to the fellows. So if you're sitting in your country and you're sitting idle and you wish to have a chat, you can just text the other fellows on the group saying that, listen, I have nothing better to do. So if anyone wants to jump on with the link of the virtual cafe, we can have a discussion. Usually that ends up being a fun session to interact with your fellows and alumni and so on and so forth. So you're also networking in a way that you're connecting with people who you wouldn't have known till yesterday. And that's the idea behind these team building exercises. If we could move on, Aditi.
I think, Ishan, there's a question if you could address one of those in the chat box. And that question is that, is this a flexible program? And I think we get a lot of queries about this. And trust me, majority of our fellows are, full-time workers, and many of them consultants who are working crazy jobs. And the way that we do it is that we record each and every of these sessions, except for the office hours, but we record all of these sessions, and we ask you for a commitment of about 6 to 10 hours in a week, and that too mostly in the evening. If you're especially joining in from India, then it's mostly going to be evening, 7:30 for you. And mostly, a lot of it is heavier towards the weekend, and that's keeping in mind that we should not disturb your other work commitments. And we also record all of these events, or all of these mentorship sessions, all of these workshops and courses, so that if you've missed any of it, because typically we also have fellows coming in from Australia, from New Caledonia, etc., and if some of the timings doesn't match, then you'll be having all of these mentor lectures, courses, workshops available on your learning management system that you can visit. And let's say you really wanted to interact with a mentor, but you can't make it at that point of time, so you can look at their mentorship session online and then meet them in the office hour. It's very common that it happens, is that in the office hour you meet them and you tell them that, hey, I could not attend your session in real time, but I looked at the whole recording and then I want to interact with you, etc., etc. So it's pretty okay. And we find that our fellows who are not just pursuing full-time jobs, but who are pursuing full-time master's programs, even MBA, MPA programs, or they are into PhD programs, they are still able to easily make time and keep pace with the fellowship. So there,
So
I don't think there
Arpit,
should be a problem.
what I'm going to do is, from the horse's mouth, I'm going to put our fellows in the hotspot. We
Let's
have
do
been
that.
joined by some of our alumni, and I can see Melissa, I can see Titli as well. So I would invite Melissa and Titli themselves to share their experiences. And it's a running joke in the fellowship. I do not miss an opportunity to put them on the spot. So Titli, Melissa, over to you.
Titli, you want to go first?
You can go first, Melissa.
Okay, I'm sorry I can't turn on my video today, but I had like an absolutely great experience. I was part of the third cohort of GPODS. Sorry, a little introduction about me. I'm currently working as a lead auditor with Societe Generale in India, and I'm really interested in the gender justice and climate space, which is what brought me to GPODS. So I actually did not know much about diplomacy, but I learned so much, and it was an absolutely enlightening experience for me. I think the best part was some of the events that we had, which was, one was the Ideation Summit, as well as the Climate Action Week, and also to meet such great co-fellows. And we had such amazing experiences even during the lectures, as well as spending time on projects and on our capstone. So the capstone project as well. So it was an absolutely great experience. Titli, you want to add on?
Yeah,
Yes,
I think
juggling so many things was the point of the question.
yeah, Melissa was superwoman with everything she was trying to do at the same time. But to give you guys a brief about me, I used to be an airline pilot, and I'm now transitioning into sustainability. So for anyone out there who thinks that you're coming from a profession that is not oriented with any of these three subjects that are part of the fellowship, you're completely wrong. If you want to make a difference and a change in the world, then I think that irrespective of whatever field you're coming from, Arpit, Ishan, and the entire GPODS team, they're extremely, supportive of a learning process. It's, I don't know how to put it. It's just been so enriching the entire experience, like Melissa said, I think the events that they had for us, we had almost like a model United Nations. We had diplomatic talks where we were all different countries trying to literally come up with solutions and realizing how real world diplomats probably deal with it. We got to speak at the London Climate Action Week, which was such an honor. And we got to write our capstone projects. Arpit and Ishan help you through it. You realize you gain, and you, like, more than learning on the outside, I think I learned about what I really want to do with my life more through the last 3 months. And anybody who's even on the fence, I would recommend just take this plunge, because it's been amazing. And like Melissa said, the best part, I think, for me was just the people I met, the horizontal networking, like Ishan put it. The people you meet, just meeting so many fellows that all want to make a difference in the world. I feel like we don't even know the potential we're going to tap into in the future. You know, if all of us get together and decide that we want to do something, I think I just have such a great band to like go along with. So yeah, that's it from my side.
And Titli, eventually the capstone project that you've submitted, we were showing it to a Stanford professor whom we were hosting at home. And so Armin, I don't know if you got a chance to interact with Armin during fellowship. So he was absolutely fascinated by what you had come up with. And I think, we are so proud and impressed that you were able to come up with such a high quality capstone submission that it's fascinating.
For all of you in the audience, guys, this is not a mutual admiration society, even though, if you do meet us individually, it will turn into one. I do not want to leave anyone out. I don't want to single anyone out either. So we've been joined by Arif, who is
yes.
circa 2020. And Arif was also managing and juggling a bunch of things at the same time along with the GPODS Fellowship. Nice to see you, Arif.
Hi, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Thanks, Ishan and Arpit, for this opportunity here to introduce myself. Currently, I'm working as a senior manager in Capgemini Invent, which is the consulting unit of Capgemini Group, which is based in Paris. I am based out of Bangalore, and I've been a part of the first cohort. So I think you have already had a gist of the, fellowship by now. So my suggestion is go for it. I'll share the link of my LinkedIn profile on the chat, and if you have any queries, you can DM me there. So that's all, sweet and short.
Thank you so much. Arif has absolutely mastered keeping it
and don't get intimidated by Arif's LinkedIn profile. He's all IAFs and all of the top consulting firms, etc.
That's true. All right. Okay. So moving on. Titli was kind enough to mention, I think Melissa also mentioned the Ideation Summit and the various events that we have. The International Ideation Summit is towards the fag end of the fellowship, where we take a bunch of topics and have the spotlight on our fellows. So they have to discuss their capstones, they have to discuss other various current issues that are happening globally, and a word of commendation for the amount of effort they put into these things, and how these events, International Ideation Summits, I think turn out to be a lot better than a lot of other events that happen globally of international repute. So we're very lucky to be hosting these GPODS Ideation Summit. It's again panel discussions on sustainability, diplomacy, private sector. We've had one on space policy. We've had one on a bunch of other things. So we keep the topics very recent and current, and we have the fellows speak in these sessions. I usually, to intimidate and to be true, share with all the fellows that we've had in the past, UK parliamentarians and so on and so forth, attend these ideation summits. So the spotlight is quite literally on them, with the who's who of the world watching them speak and discuss issues of importance. So Aditi, if you could very quickly move on, because I know that Swati has joined us, so we should probably be stopping there. The whole fellowship kind of culminates into a capstone project, one that we were mentioning about Titli. She did an excellent work, but every fellow has to work on a capstone project, and this capstone project does not have to be something that we propose. It could be anything that interests you, that has been touched upon in the fellowship in one of our sessions, the ones that Arpit and I take, or John or or anyone else does, but also anything that the mentor might have discussed. So you might be interested in, something as simple as waste management issues, or something as actually that's not a very simple topic, to be honest, but something as complicated as waste management and say purple economy, and what's happening with the Renaissance dam crisis in Africa. It could be anything that you want to write on. The idea is for you to have, the fellow to have a published product by the end of the fellowship, or at least close to the end of the fellowship. And we also, as Titli again was kind enough to mention, we try and guide you through the process. And yeah, I also want to tell our team that this 095, Surojit has just entered using 095928 as his number. So if you could make him the co-host as well. All right, moving on. It's a culmination of a bunch of organizations coming together. So GPODS is NVPOL, it is Global Policy Insights, IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, GYLA, and Arpit AN.
Yeah, it's Associated Network for CSOs and NGOs for South-South Cooperation. That's one word that most of us get hung up on.
All
but
right,
essentially, it's a UN South-South Cooperation Agency.
Correct. I'm not very good with tongue twisters, guys, so my apologies. Anyway, we have been getting a bunch of comments in the chat box, so we'll take up those questions now. We still have about 10 minutes before we welcome our, as I keep mentioning, our global stalwarts. Aditi, you could probably stop sharing your screen and we could just move on to the questions that we've received. All right, so we've already taken Priyanka's question. I think Arpit has taken Jago's question as well.
I have.
All right. Jay has been very kind with this comment as well. I'm really looking forward to our sessions there once the fellowship is up and running. In fact, we had a bit of an interaction in the morning as well. Yeah, so I think that's about it, guys. If there are any questions, happy to answer them. If you want to talk to us privately, we've shared our email IDs. You can also reach out to us on LinkedIn. You can reach out to other fellows on LinkedIn. It's always nice to start the horizontal networking as soon as possible. And yeah, I think what we will try and do now is we have a short video for you. As soon as the video gets over, we'll be moving on to the main event of the day, where we'll be joined by, as I mentioned, Mr. Surojit Bose, Ms. Swati Vasudevan, Mr. Anish Day, and Mr. Abhishek Bhatia. So we'll try and play that video as soon as we can. In the meanwhile, please do feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Okay, the video's up. Thank you, Srishti.
We don't hear the sound over there. Srishti?
Srishti, maybe you could stop the video and reshare your
Yeah,
screen with the
replay
audio.
it after enabling the audio. Thank you. No, Srishti, you'll have to stop sharing the screen. This is a place where, you are not really a student.
Got it.
We are not really teachers. We are all coming together in a community of fellowship. And that's the reason why we call it a fellowship, where we think that everybody makes knowledge or builds knowledge based on the ideas that they already have in their mind.
The problem is greenhouse gas emissions that affect the temperature of the climate.
You have to go back to the basics each time you feel you run into an ambiguous situation. And that's where things like critical thinking and problem solving and root cause problem solving comes in. It's, for example, starts with defining first what the problem is rather than getting into solving the problem.
Companies like Microsoft is a good example that have committed even not just to become net zero, but they want to sort of offset their historic emissions as well. So those are incredibly ambitious targets, and that's good. We want that ambition, we want that awareness.
Policy making body on environment at the same level with the General Assembly for all other issues globally. But for environment, it established the United Nations Environment Assembly.
The fact that the G7 came together and pledged an additional billion doses of the COVID vaccine next year on top of the billion that's already been promised. This is important. Of course, there's been criticism saying that's not enough. Of course, it's not enough, but still, that's $1 billion.
You might define it as coordinated and synchronized action that often deliberately targets democratic states and institutions.
As in international relations and diplomacy, it often is very important, to be heard, to be able to state your case and your position. Whether you get it in the end is a different story, but in order, you have to be transparent, you have to be inclusive. And that was something that Copenhagen was not. As you perhaps know, there were like backdoor negotiations, but Paris was very, very open, very inclusive.
Every year I went to the NASCOM annual conference. Fantastic. You met people who were thinking out of the line, out of the box. And it's not a small box, but a huge box and so forth. It shows that India has a capacity to develop a global industry that can service the whole world, the whole corporate world.
GPODS has helped us build such a rich network of professionals who are truly global and, are actually working at the cutting edge of solving some real policy problems.
I would like to look at a case study of Cambodia in Thailand. In Thailand, in 2018, the government actually set aside a social security program that also provides an health security for the 1/5% of the urban poor, and it is called National Health Equity Program. And in this equity program, it comes with two facets. Number one, it's helped to guarantee the health security of the people of the 1/5% of urban poor and the poorest of the poor in the country, and also help to empower the hospitals and the district hospitals with equipment, with facilities that could aid them in attending to the urban poor.
As I said, Venezuelan migrant women, and they are caught in between a situation where their original healthcare system of their home country is not adequate to meet the needs and expectations of COVID-19. So they historically have been migrants to neighboring countries such as Colombia, but because of the restrictions on equal access to healthcare as well as other universal human rights in Colombia, it becomes a precarious situation for these migrant women who are looking for safe jobs, who are trying to avoid gender-based violence, which unfortunately is very frequently occurring over there, on top of not having that healthcare access, and are actually, in most cases, forced to return home to Venezuela. And during this pandemic, it's not good. And generally,
it was an amazing experience because I would say I've come from a totally quantitative background, and this program has given my mind some great wings because I've met mentors from different walks of life and transcending many different avenues of human endeavor. So in that sense, I would say it's total diversification, and very, very thankful to GPODS and to the fellow mates.
All right, so I think we can request our panelists now, as we change gears, to switch on their videos. We have Mr. Surajit Bose, I think, who's already here, and so is Ms. Swati Vasudevan. So if I could request the two of them to, switch on their videos. All right. Hi, Surajit. Hi, Swati. We're still waiting on Abhishek and Anish to join us. I'm just, guys, if you're thinking what I'm doing with my phone, I'm just texting Abhishek to check where he is. Hi, Anish. Nice to see you.
Hi. Hi, Shank.
We're still waiting on Abhishek. All right. So while we do that, and while we do wait on Abhishek, let me first welcome all of our panelists. Anish, Swati, Surajit. You missed the introduction, but I have been referring you to as global stalwarts in the sustainability space, in the ecosystem of various things that you do handle. So with that slight sort of a pressure situation where I've already built up quite a bit, I would move on to the introduction of what we are discussing. I see that Abhishek is also here with us. I'll request our team to make him a co-host. And hi, Abhishek, if you're here, I request you to switch on your video whenever you can. All right. So for those of you, and I know that this is the main event that all of you have been waiting for, we are here to discuss, the topic of our discussion is integrating sustainability in the private sector. And I could not be any more grateful to Surajit, Swati, Anish, and Abhishek for taking out the time and discussing, one of the more important, and also, to be honest, one of the more interesting discussions that's going around within the sustainability domain as to how do you integrate the private sector into with the ideals of sustainability that we speak of so often. So Abhishek has joined in from 2 devices, so we're making him the co-host. Yeah, Abhishek, I do not know if you can unmute yourself now.
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah.
All right, great.
All good.
All right, great. So nice to see you, Abhishek. What we're going to do is, I'm going to quickly go on to the introductions, but I'm also very conscious of the time that our panelists have given to us. So I would not want to beat around the bush, move on to the discussion straight away. As I said, we're discussing integrating sustainability in the private sector, one of the most intriguing discussions of our times. And if I may, one of the discussions that has a lot of bearing on where we will be as a species. So no pressure to all of those who are discussing this along with me. We're joined by Ms. Swati Vasudevan. Swati, thank you for being here. She is the former Deputy Director, Strategy, Planning and Management, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, India. Again, she has blessed the GPODS Fellowship with her mentorship in the past, and we're very grateful to have her here. We're also joined by Anish Day. Anish is the Global Head, Power and Utilities at KPMG. Thank you so much for taking out the time, Anish. I'm sure this is the first of many such discussions that we would be having. Surajit, who's also kind of helped us frame the design for this session, because that was one of the most important introductory calls that we had about this session. So thank you so much. Surajit is the Associate Vice President of Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverages. And also, if I may, he has dabbled in various elements of sustainability, which would also lead me to a very interesting question right to begin this discussion. Finally, and certainly not the least by any domain, we joined by Abhishek. Mr. Abhishek Bhatia is the Managing Director and Partner of the Boston Consulting Group, India. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for being here. Thank you, Surajit, Swati, and Anish. So we know that what we're talking about has quite certainly a bearing on our understanding of how sustainability really works in the private sector. A lot of the times, our understanding of environmentalism, our understanding of sustainability sort of pitches sustainability as against private sector, which a lot of us, I'm sure, would argue is not the correct way to look at things. Which leads me to the most basic question of them all to start off this discussion. But before I go on to that question, let me tell all of our audience members that you can ask your questions at any point of time. Please do mention your name if it isn't reflecting in the name that you've logged in with, so that we can address your question personally as well. And again, due to the paucity of time, if we're not able to answer any questions here, you have info@gpods.org already mentioned the chat box, so please feel free to write your questions to us, and we'll also try and get them answered at a later stage. So, as I was saying, before we move into the sort of deep discussion into private sector, sustainability, SDGs, greenwashing, motivation, all of those things. I want to start with a very basic question. I'll come to you, Surojit, because you've worked in so many elements of sustainability generally. What really is sustainability? And is the definition of sustainability any different when you're viewing it from the private sector? Is it, in your experience, is it too many different things which are difficult to get together? Or does it have to be viewed from a single lens? Does it have to be a combination of various other things? So that's my first question to Surojit.
Well, thank you so much, Ishan. Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you, GPODS, for inviting at the very outset. And moderators, Ishan and Arpit, thank you so much. And my fellow panelists, Swati, Anish, and Abhishek. To answer your question, I will take a little bit of time, but I would like to begin with what sustainability actually means today. I have been around in this field for about 20 odd years, and what it means today has completely metamorphosed, if you like, over the period. And today, companies look at it very differently from before, and I really applaud you all at GPODS to have this wonderful topic on integrating sustainability. So I would just briefly define that with an example on circularity and circular economy, which is the need of the hour, and try to bring the elements of how companies are integrating sustainability. And I would also like to give you some emerging trends on where we are going, and it's making absolutely mandatory this entire aspect of integrating sustainability. I hope it would be very relevant for the audience here. Firstly, the sustainability goals and objectives, are, as you would have seen, slightly long-term, that what we would achieve in the next 10 years, next 15 years. However, the whole idea is to have a short-term action right now, right here, right today. And the motto is, for most organizations, future-proofing the business, communities, and the planet with climate action. Because climate action is what is shaping this entire debate around how you should integrate sustainability. I'll just give you the example from my company in Coca-Cola, which has quite a long legacy on carbon reduction of over 20 years now. We had started with life cycle analysis of trying to understand which is better, glass is better, plastics are better, and so on and so forth. And continues, that journey still continues. Lightweighting different kinds of packaging. Then we had metrics called energy efficiency, the specific energy efficiency, energy usage ratio, and we had the target called the drink in your hand. Any drink in your hand. So we had a target of reducing by 25% based on a 2010 baseline, which we also attained, just last year. But now the game has moved on to the science-based, which required us to set what is called the absolute reduction targets of emission. So we are required, based on our assessment of the science around climate change, to reduce by 25% in absolute terms over the period of 2015 and 2030. Okay. And then also we have now enshrined the net zero target, which is in our ESG report of 2020. And you must understand that what was the earlier drink in your hand intensity target is now an absolute. And that actually brings in this entire play of trying to understand, emissions better. You would also appreciate, the value chain that a company, any company, for that matter, and FMCG, it starts with ingredient sourcing, you've got distribution, you've got packaging, you've got cold drink equipment, manufacturing. It would not surprise you, I'm sure, to know that more than 70% of the emissions, more than almost 70-80% of the total water consumption lies outside of manufacturing, right? And this requires tremendous amount of understanding of the entire value chain with a new, sort of a lens, a new magnifying glass to understand where differences can be made. Now, all the global goals that we have, for example, around packaging, sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, sugar reduction, all of them have a component in helping with the emission reduction. And most of these targets also have co-benefits of saving water, circularity of material, cost savings on energy, and so on and so forth. So to summarize, if you were to ask the question that, how difficult this is, how important this is, it is essentially very religiously following all your targets around circular economy, water, security, sustainable agriculture, biofuels, electric vehicles transformation, so on and so forth, that allow you to innovate the model and come to a better future state. And that also leads to the attainment of the science-based targets. I think this background was a little lengthy, but was very important for us to understand. So, when you talk about integrating sustainability, it is about, and we need to understand this very clearly, as I go on to the example, it is about transforming long-term goals into the annual targets. That's all it is about. Having business and sustainability metrics that are agreed upon by a range of stakeholders within the organization, outside the organization. Sharing the big picture and iteratively selecting, the right business model and the data integration and the transparency that is required to achieve the taxonomy on sustainable investments that need to be made. Okay? So if I went on to the example, and if you wanted to sort of give a definition to what is integrating sustainability in business, I would say that it's the art and science of converting long-term goals to concrete metrics and spends in annual business plans, which encompass all areas of a business. For example, finance, legal, procurement, supply chain, marketing, public affairs, and communications, the entire whole lot. To give this example, out of circularity and materials, I just told you that almost 80% of the emissions and footprints lie outside of the manufacturing space. Okay? And there is convergence of standards and reporting which is happening. The science-based targets are getting conjoined with the goals around circularity. Materiality is taking a different phase. Materiality used to mean the threshold at which one would call it that this is important for stakeholders and me, and this is how I prioritize the sustainability issues. But now it's a concept of double materiality. How I spend money is also how the money spent is being influenced by materiality is also the new reality. So how I can influence the future as well as how the future of sustainability finance can influence. So the concept of double materiality is also. So if a solve has to be obtained, to have a cost-effective model, because every organization would want to look at a cost-effective model as well, that leads to 100% compliance and going beyond it. One needs to recognize that the field of compliance is a moving target today in any field, and the goalposts are always being moved around. So year to year, you need to have a solid integration of these renewed goalposts to be able to see, is my investment enough? Is my action enough? And there is not just one model. There's no one silver bullet that will solve the puzzle. Today we have several options, several trade-offs, and different costs on them. So a great starting point is consultation, internal experts, external experts, models that work in other geographies, learning from startups, ownership of the entire project that is usually not with just one unit. It is a combined trial and error to avoid the wrong choice of model, and hence iterative piloting becomes essential. So it's a huge space. And just to give you an example, in circularity around plastics, one of the things that is heavily evolving is reverse logistics and partnerships with large and small recyclers and different actors around the waste value chain. The new reality will be something called RPET, which is bottle-to-bottle recycling. Today in India, you would know that PET, which is what the bottles are made of, has a very interesting economy. It is of 7.5 lakh crore economy, which employs over 71 lakh across India as of now, which is where the PET plastic goes into textiles and into fiber in what we call open loop recycling. Right. But the future will be even lower carbon, closed loop recycling, which is bottle to bottle. So this RPET is a completely new business model, and it will not fit the size or the scale or the kind of things which are happening, let us say, in a Southeast Asian country. India is very unique. Digitization and transparency, the data analytics and the use of AI and ML in MIS and IT tools to have just one version of truth That is emerging as a very compelling reason to integrate this across the board. Right advocacy with stakeholders, what the ministry would think, what the industry associations think, what the state and central agencies, and the advocacy for legal changes to lower the carbon footprint, to explain the business case to the stakeholders correctly. So it's a very large campus which is coming. And finally, every corporate would like to leverage this as a competitive advantage, use this as a lever to change consumer behavior, make them aware, educate them, and of course, create value at the bottom of the pyramid. Social impacts in creating jobs, safe workspaces, diversity and inclusion, all these are part of the big picture. Integration of sustainability for short, medium, and long term. And finally, a dashboard and a picture of success that has to be commonly understood throughout the organization. So as you can see, this is not a standalone piece anymore. It's very much and vital. Lastly, I'll just sign off. I'm sorry, I'm taking a bit of time, but the emergence of ESG, environmental and social governance, and sustainability investment, I think it's very, very important for all of us to understand that today you have venture capitals, bonds, and different kinds of sustainability instruments, and new climate tech funds that will completely disrupt this entire world of ours. Okay? Innovations in material and deep technology solutions are just round the corner. I think 2022 is going to be a phenomenal year for how sustainability will get integrated. Different filters are there, themes and levels of impacts, mandatory disclosures and convergence of ESG standards. Now, what does it mean for a financial institution when you say sustainability has to be integrated? ESG integration is about systematic and explicit inclusion of ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors into the financial analysis by investment managers. Now, it's a big deal. You know, it's not easy for an investment manager to, in the different phases of the investment cycle, to be able to build in the different kinds of screening, the different kinds of models. So this is something that every organization is studying and coming close to. Lastly, the ESG indicators which are there, the indices. You have today a plethora of them: MSCI, Dow Jones, FTSE, Nifty, and look at the themes: carbon, diversity and inclusion, environment. So you have to look at a very wide canvas, actually. The ESG report of Coca-Cola company, 2020, if you go on the web and look at it, it mentions resilience 21 times. 21 times. The investors are asking about the quality of the asset and the resilience of the asset against climate change, and not just the asset, also the communities around. So, frameworks like the Task Force on Climate-related Disclosures are making us understand the vulnerabilities across the supply chain, right? And lastly, the role of the board is shaping the ESG agenda today. Therefore, Ishan, sorry about the very long answer to your question, maybe, but, the reality is, if we have to future-proof the business and the community and the planet with climate action, it is not going to happen without integrating sustainability right into the heart of the organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I had a few follow-ups, but we can take them up later on as well. But just so that we don't forget, and if anybody else can comment on this as well, I had a few. So one is that Surajit said that compliance is a moving goalpost, and if it is a moving goalpost, then how do you keep up with it? That was one question. The other question was that Surajit said that it's important to manage relationships with the government and the ministries as well as the industry organizations. So specifically about the industry organizations, I was just curious about what their role is and how why are they important. I think two of those things, and I had a third one which will come back to me.
All right, and Surajit, if you want to go ahead with the answer, if anyone else wants to comment, I know that Anish, Abhishek, Swati, all of them have substantial experience in especially compliances and how to deal with.
Oh yeah, I have my third one coming back to me now. So the third one was that Surajit said that 80% of the emissions are coming from outside of the factory in the value chain. So how do you manage all of your supply chain and other parts of the value chain?
But I think we could take up that question at the end, because that's sort of all encompassing.
So Ishan, I leave it to you. I think, in all fairness, I think we should have a balance amongst all of us, and I shouldn't hog the stage. So over to, I can always
Sure, let's move to the next question. We'll bring this in. So
All right.
Ishan, over to you.
All right. And if you, if any of you ever want to jump in and add to any of the other statements, please feel free to do this. Again, thank you, Surajit, because you've given us a very holistic sort of as many questions as answers, if I have to be honest, because where do you draw the line? Where do you stop at environment and start with social, and stop at social and start with governance, and so many of those other things with the advocacy issue and so on and so forth. I want to touch upon something that kind of gets lost in translation very often, and I'd like to come to Swati with this question. We sometimes have, since goalpost is something that we're taking as a metaphor now, we have our goals in place that so 2030 we'll do this, 2050 we'll be net zero. For China, they'll be net zero by 2060, whatever. There's also an element of just transitions in terms of our energy infrastructure. And I know that Anish has substantial knowledge of this, so I invite him to add on to what Swati says as well. How do we cope with this just transition thing? So for our audience members, to give you a background of what I'm asking, all of us want to be net zero, but it will be unjust to large parts of our population, of our human development as well, to go from wherever our carbon footprint is today to zero tomorrow. Because, a lot of people make their livelihood from that space between zero carbon footprint and whatever it is today. So how is the energy industry heading there? Are there any just transition formally, generally? So over to you, Swati. And then hopefully Anish could add to this as well.
And Swati, just to add to Ishan's question, I know that you've worked with the energy industry for quite a number of years. And just curious on, what's the perspective on the side of, the traditional energy source based companies like the oil companies, the coal companies. And do you see, that some of these companies will have to work seriously towards transforming themselves onto newer forms of energy? So over to you, Swati.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Arpit and Ishan. That's quite a few questions. I try to note them down mentally, but if I don't get to it, please do remind me. Sure. So maybe I'll start with your first point about energy transition. And I think that's a big one because when we talk, and let me take India as an example, just as a reference point, just kind of to contain the conversation a little bit. When we talk about carbon emissions, some of the biggest hitters of carbon emissions are industry, surface transport, buildings, and power sector. I mean, those pretty much cover most of it. So, and industry is a big one amongst these. The government, especially after the Paris Agreement in India, has taken a lot of steps, very positive steps from the government side. In parallel, there are a lot of efforts being made by the private sector out of their own volition, and of course, in lockstep with the government's regulation, compliance, etc. Also, to do things which are necessary for, of course, climate, decarbonizing their spaces, their sectors, their businesses, and country as a whole from the government standpoint, but also to make their own businesses sustainable and risk mitigated in the long term, if I can put it that way. So I think two things are happening at the same time, which is the private sector moving at its own pace. And the second is the regulatory environment coming into play to put that additional nudge, if I can put it that way, that tries to hasten the pace of evolution of the decarbonization of the country, especially of the power sector. And they're doing it in a way. So industry, let's take the industry as an example, because that's kind of what you were focusing on. There are a lot of things happening there. There is grid purchase, the stuff happening on the grid purchase side. Distributed renewable power is being encouraged and is now being, part of the policies from the government. One of my favorite ones is the PAT scheme, the PAT scheme, which hits not just the regular industry, but also the heavy hitting industries, such as the iron and steel, chemicals, petrochemicals, cement. They're also called the hard to abate sectors, just for the benefit of the students here. So they're also addressing the hard to abate sectors as they move from PAT scheme 1 to 2nd to 3rd. So we're on now in the 3rd phase of that scheme. And I'm not saying everything is working perfectly and, everyone is following along exactly as it was intended, because these things all take their time. Evolution happens. Regulatory environment is not the only one. You have to have the legal frameworks in place, for example, to make the energy saving certificates valid and bankable and tradable, just as one example. So a lot of things have to happen simultaneously. The stakeholders have to come together. So energy certificates are very much a real thing, and they are being traded, they are being banked for later use by companies, and hard to abate sectors are coming along nicely, slowly, slower than we would all like, but it's moving. And again, since we're talking about India, it's a large elephant to make dance. So it's going to, so we just have to be a little practical here. Surface transport, there's a lot happening, and I think we've all heard about the whole policy environment that's encouraging the, EVs, electric vehicles, and the whole infrastructure that comes along with it. And pretty much every companies in India and globally, of course, are engaged in trying to do that. But again, it's not just because the government is encouraging it or pushing it or having an enabling policy in place, but coming back to what I said earlier, a lot of the automotive companies, which in some ways kind of is part of the industry, if I can put it that way, right? So yes, we're talking about surface transport, but we are again coming back to the industry, right? They're all kind of overlap with each other. So the automotive sector in the industry is doing this and working on finding alternate fuels, including hydrogen now, as we've now seen green hydrogen, partly because, and this has been going on for quite some time, the fuel cells, etc. All of that's happening because they are worried about their future. They're worried about being out of date and out of business. So, there is a movement happening, on that side, not just from the regulatory standpoint, but also from the consumer space, what the customer is asking for, what the investors in these organizations are asking for. There's a lot of pressure from the investors as well. So I think there are multiple forces at play. I guess what the point I'm trying to make, not just regulatory framework, but also the pressure from the investors, the customers, in some ways employees too. And as we move forward to the next couple of decades, that employee pressure is going to get more and more strong. It's going to get stronger. So that's the stuff that's happening on the industry side, including automotive sector that I talked about. Oil and gas is probably the biggest culprit here. I'm not going to go into details on that sector, partly because I'm kind of partly guilty of having worked in that sector myself, and I'm kind of doing penance now as we speak for having contributed to the negative side of that story. But I think oil and gas sector is trying to make amends. In India, we don't see a whole lot of that. And I'm not sure what's the reason. It's not, yes, there's a lot of global evidence that the sustainability initiatives are impacting long-term profit or are favorable to profitability and growth in the long term. So there is evidence saying that, but we don't see that demonstration in India as much. And that there could be quite a few factors contributing to it. I think some of it is, but I'll mention the one that is the least obvious to the mind, which is the cultural aspect. We do in India have a cultural component of being a last minute, kind of a society. So we do see the problem in the future. We do see it, but it's not right around the corner. We don't see it right around the corner. And I think we're just waiting for it to be right around the corner, around the bend, and come and hit us immediately to make us to start making very big changes. So I think that's what's happening on the oil and gas side. Partly also because, and that's partly because of belief. There's a gap in the belief system. The rest of the world believe that oil and gas or the fossil fuel will comprise 6% of total fuel, of the total fuel usage in the world by 2030. But oil and gas as a sector, globally speaking, not just India, believes that that fossil fuels will continue to play a 20% contribution. So I think there's a difference in the belief system also, which is contributing to that delay in demonstrating that evidence of sustainability efforts today do help long-term growth and profitability. So that's the second point. Buildings, let's come to buildings, because in some ways, yes, that's not industry, but it impacts industry indirectly because it consumes a lot of equipment and parts which are industry manufactured. And as I think Surajit mentioned earlier, it is all interlinked. We can't just talk about one and not talk about the externalities of what's happening within, of what's happening within a closed space, whether it's a manufacturing plant or a company. So buildings, that's a big one. There's a lot happening on that side. BEE. Yeah, Ishan.
If I may very quickly, because you raise a very, very interesting point on so much that goes on with the oil and gas sector, generally the conventional energy-based sector. So I actually wanted to, and I'll come back to you about the urban infrastructure and buildings point, because it is certainly one of my favorite research interests. I'm coming to very quickly and including Anish and then Abhishek in the discussion about this, and with sort of like factual questions that have their basis in philosophy as well. One is I'd like to pick up on a very, very interesting thought that you raised, which was our growth in terms of where we're heading in terms of, in the parlance that we were talking of, in terms of our carbon footprint or the fact that we're going to better, cleaner technologies going forward, is slower than we'd like. And that's, I think, a factual statement that not everyone would deny at least. And the other thing was, when it comes to oil and gas sector, how there seems to be a dichotomy of what we're doing versus what we're being perceived to do. By we, I'm obviously being the devil's advocate, if I may. So I want to take up Anish's viewpoint, because I know that Anish works in the space for generally. So Anish, where do you come in when you're asked about the growth rate of developing consciousness and that being externalized into specific actions of each of these companies or industries generally? Do you think that there's a gap between what's happening and what should happen? Or do you think that as a company, my role is to do this, and if you give me this diktat, I'll do it, but anything more than that, I'm not expected to do in the first place?
So let me take the society thing first. Of course, thank you for having me here. So let me take the societal aspect first, and Swati made a comment on that, which is intriguing. Okay, which is in three parts. One is that we don't seem to recognize the problem adequately, or even if we do, we don't seem to be acting till the last moment. And a little bit of it is cultural, or much of it is cultural, underlying that late action or lack of action. Let's just go and understand the context of this from India's standpoint, and it'll come back to the point of just transition and whether we are doing enough or not. So the first point is that when we compare ourselves with Western nations, or nations which are now actually degrowing in some sense in energy terms already, versus our 4-5-6% growth of energy, I think these are not comparables at all. Okay, so India has still a very large number of people who are, where development has to touch them much better because they are not at the same economic situation as the rest of the developed world. So when that growth comes, okay, so you see growth, consequently you see a growth for energy, and you recognize that you need energy of every form to feed that growth. Okay, so it's not about replacing one with the other. It's actually catering to a large growth which is happening on the go. And those are very different problem statements. Okay, and I think the moment we understand that, we possibly will understand that it's a little more than cultural last-minute action, Last minute action also happens because we are in breakneck growth for a while now. And unless you can be a China society, and even China makes its own mistakes all the way. Okay. So unless you are in a regimented society which is growing, if you are in a democratic society which is growing, there is a certain amount of chaos and last minute action which is inbuilt into democratic society. So you can't avoid that process altogether. So I would just say that, you know, it might be cultural, but there's a nuance to it further in terms of the state that we are in, okay, to kind of manage to our requirements. Now, from there, let's go into the question of, you know, I'll come to the just transition question after I answer your hydrocarbons, carbon intensive fuel, you know, question, whether we are acting or not. The answer to that is that we are doing a fair bit. You know, it's not that we are, you know, not doing. We have already 100 gigawatts of renewable energy. We have the power tax scheme in action, third cycle, as what you mentioned. We have energy efficiency, otherwise at large, playing out on very large scale, global scale programs, actually largest in the world kind of programs. So it's not that things are not happening. I don't think we get the credit for that just because the alternative is also growing. Okay, coal was growing in the past. Our diesel consumption is growing, but that is only to feed the natural cycle of growth rather than because we don't want to do something else. Okay, so, you know, the clean energy things portfolio is also growing very, very quickly. But let's flip it around. I think you're not going to see a next coal-fired plant financed. I mean, there might be one-off cases, but you're not going to see any future coal-fired plant financed in the country. It's actually not financeable anymore, right? So all you're doing is possibly just maintaining your asset stock at a certain level while adding on renewable energy stock to it, okay? And why do you need to maintain your asset stock? Because otherwise your energy systems will collapse. Right? So if you don't have your current asset stock, your energy systems will collapse. Our energy systems have been built for a certain kind of assets. And in a growth phase, if you're trying to change that very rapidly, your system will collapse. And this is, you know, engineering 101. Okay, so there is no complexity in this. Okay, so I think while ideologically it's not that anybody is opposed, whether I'll come to industry later, but, you know, I'm saying even societally, I think India is actually pretty okay on this one. Okay, it's just that the realities are somewhat, you know, different from much of the world, the developed world, and I think we have to take note of that reality. Okay, go ahead.
If we can, yeah, go back to Swati on this, because I'd like to understand a little bit about the cultural aspect of you know, the debate over here, because
and also because Swati has been in various places and experienced this.
And Swati has headed a public policy school, so I want to ask Swati over there that I remember that while we were working together, I'd authored an article which said that, you know, in India we have this tendency of moving early enough but never doing enough. So, you know, it's almost like a flip of too little too late. We are early enough but never enough that we are always quick to commit to the you know, most progressive ideals, always you know, one of the most ambitious target setters in the Paris Climate Agreement, or in various other socio-political commitments that we have. We are the first to put our hat in the ring, but then after that we kind of sit around. After that we are not really moving fast enough, committing towards you know,
I'm not
fulfilling
sure
some.
if Swati is going to be in complete agreement with you there, but Swati, over to you.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that no, I do see that there is perhaps a cultural issue over there, wherein we talk about growth and we talk about, you know, some of these ideals as competing values. And I was just thinking if Swati can comment on that.
Yeah, so before I comment on the second piece, I wanted to just clarify a bit. I don't think we should belabor the cultural aspect too much, because, you know, going back to what I said earlier, that there are quite a few other reasons, very good, logical reasons act for a democracy like ours, and the size of the country like ours, with the practical issues and the complexity of the country and its myriad of diversity, etc. that contribute to the pace that we see today. Mentioned culture, that's the one of the lesser appreciated ones. So that's the reason why I comment on that. But the other ones, I thought, we are all aware in one form or another. We've heard other people talk about. So so I just want to make sure that's clear. But even in that cultural piece, I wouldn't beat ourselves up, frankly, because there is a lot of good work happening. There is a bit of what you said, Arpit, also true, which is we start off pretty good, but we're not able to take it to the finish line, but not because of lack of intent. I want to be very, very clear there. There are practical reasons for why we're not able to take it to the finish line. Let me take an example here. So renewables, installed capacity, right? So our goal was to get to 30% or something, I believe, by 2030, I believe. But I think we're already at 40% of installed capacity being renewable.
Yeah.
That is a very, very good number.
It's incredible.
Right? But when you look at the amount of generation happening and how much of it is coming from coal-fired versus non-fossil fuel-oriented generation sources, the numbers are very skewed. So the generation is still happening from mostly fossil fuel or thermal-based power plants. I mean, there are quite a few reasons for that. One being the thermal power plants have to operate at least their minimum 55% technical capacity. That's an engineering issue. We don't have storage inbuilt, which is a balance of system issue because the batteries are expensive. But let's not get into the details. The point I'm trying to make is the integration of the renewables capacity within the overall power capacity, energy production capacity is not complete yet. So that's why you see what you see. So when you talk about taking to the finish line will happen when we are able to integrate this new generation capacity
into underlying systems.
Into the operation, so that we're not having to upcycle and downcycle our coal fleet very quickly, and that's and we are able to utilize the peak demand and the morning and evening with hydropower, daytime with solar power, and etc. So all of that requires a lot of synchronization, technical synchronization, and storage capacity, battery storage. That's a lot of capital cost upfront. So there are a lot of good reasons for why we don't see the finish line being reached yet. So I just want to kind of stop there. The second question you asked about was I believe it was the trade-off between growth, profitability, and sustainable efforts. I believe that was your second question. So again, the answer to that question, and I'm assuming your question is there a trade-off? And I think the response really depends on two things. What time horizon are we looking at? Short-term or long-term? And second, how do we measure and account for profitability and hence growth in our private sector? I think it's very clear that, short-term, there may be some trade-offs between profitability and the sustainability efforts. I think the reasons are obvious. But long-term, it does act as an enabler for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, because it does help you to get ease of access of capital, because now you have socially conscious capital available to you, which may not be available to you otherwise, or ability to attract talent, especially socially aware talent, ability to get access to this socially aware customer base, etc. So I think long-term, it's an enabler. So I don't believe there is essentially a trade-off between the two. It's just the time horizon that, the answer might vary. Secondly, I talked about how do we measure and take into account profitability. So today, the regulatory environment hasn't really caught on, or it's still, or I would say it is still playing catch up when it comes to being able to value and hence put a tangible cost and number quantification to the use of resources, natural resources, and degradation of resources of the environment, and then forcing the companies to, because we put a value to it, and then actually having the companies account for it in their profit and loss, and hence automatically growth. So I think if we did do that true accounting of all the total true costs factored in, then there isn't really a trade-off even in the, is I guess the point I'm trying to make. So those are the 2 points I'll stop at, because I know we have, I'd love to hear from Abhishek and the others as well. There are a lot of other people.
Thank you, Swati. You've given us enough material to have another discussion altogether on all of these things that you've mentioned. All right, I'll come to Abhishek, and I'll come to Abhishek with something that Swati mentioned. So I'll continue the flow of the conversation there. I would not say public perception, because I think it's also a sort of an industry perception that the way you look at sustainability now, there is an opposing force of degrowth when you're becoming sustainable with time. And I'll come to Anish and Surojit with this question as well, because I think it affects everyone, and Anish was still to talk about just transitions as well, so we try and fit that in as well. But Abhishek, where is it a justified fear to have that if I do go green, or if I do come up with my net zero targets in 20 years time, I'm looking at degrowth as an industry. I'm not looking at sustainable development where I'm championing sustainability and championing development, economic and otherwise as well. Is there an inherent dichotomy there, or is that a realistic fear?
Sure. No, thanks, Ishan, for the question. Thanks, everybody, and great to be part of the panel. Maybe I'll just one second. You can hear me, right?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, sorry.
And we just had your audio spotlight.
I know.
Your video
Yeah. So I think I'll make 2-3 points, and one, of course, answering your question, Ishan. But I think just from the discussion, I think great to hear strides being made by Coca-Cola in their sustainability journey. But I think I at least have maybe a view of more companies, if I may say, because we have been having these discussions on environment, ESG topics, sustainability. So I'll try to bucket them maybe in 3 areas. There's a scenario, one, companies who have a pure commercial focus. I have a project-based approach. I will do energy efficiency projects because it delivers me X number of payback years, for the X number of rupees that I'm investing. So only those financially attractive energy efficiency, waste to wealth kind of projects is like our category 1. Category 2 are like the balanced approach kind of guys. They will maybe do the 80-20 on environment, ESG, and say that, okay, am I just crossing the finish line on my ESG score? Hence, I don't have any negative impact on my interest cost. And that is my category 2. Maybe Coke is category 3, in which there is a board, there is a CEO, there is a promoter maybe who's actually really gung-ho about this, really factoring everything. So and I think there is a huge 80-20 in this. The 80% of India still is maybe in scenario 1 or category 1 or 2 kind of companies, not looking at the holistic picture there, wherein they are able to accept a cash flow impact of actually doing action here. So that is, I think, one point which we need to keep in mind, given that a large part of India does not see this as a burning platform, or large part of private sector does not see this as a burning platform. And to Swati's point, that we need to create either the regulatory push or just the pure economics push to actually create that as a burning platform. Anish mentioned.
I think that also lends into Anish's point and Swati's point when it came to the trade-off bit. Anyway,
correct. No. So Anish said that there will be no coal-based power plant that will be set up, but that is, it's more an economics push, if I may say. While of course at the back of the mind people are thinking of that 20 years hence I will still be burning coal. No, I should not be. But the economics push which happened in US, etc., is what is determining that a coal-based power plant may not get financed. So I think that is one part of the equation that we must take care of. The second point I would make, again in response to some of the points, I think especially on integrating this into the private sector, I think we should definitely look at China as an example. While China, what is private sector and what is public sector is always hazy. Yeah. But I think the fact is, given that it is hazy, it is actually ensuring those elements which Swati mentioned get ticked off. Where you need that regulatory push to actually get the right economic incentives for a transition to happen, that is actually happening. So while we are struggling with still thermal power plants being a larger part of our generation capacity, China by 2025 is doubling nuclear power capacity, or buying mines in Namibia to actually fund that uranium because they also don't have it. So it's just that right mix of I'm saying public and private action, which is actually helping there. While it's not a model to be emulated, but maybe the right actions out of it, we should definitely become part of a charter for us. That how do we act? Let the government also act in cohorts to actually nudge the private sector in the right direction. And the third point, Ishan, as you mentioned on the degrowth part. So I think the answer, of course, the jury is still out. I don't want to be the forecaster who errs on the right, the wrong side of history,
or
but
the bearer of bad news.
no, but so the bearer. I think. See, I think Surajit mentioned an extremely good point on the circular economy. I think the entire degrowth point needs to be looked at from the point of view, if I may, if I just split it into two parts. One is the core energy generation economy which we are seeing, which is actually replaceable. I should ideally replace my coal power plant with a solar plant, with a nuclear power plant, etc., which is not really a degrowth. Right? If the energy intensity of my GDP continues to remain the same, or actually
pure substitution, then
it's a substitution. So that doesn't really fund degrowth. It actually fuels more growth, fuels higher productive growth. In the Cobb-Douglas function. So I will actually get more GDP out of it.
Sure.
If I look at, but the other side, which is the core, consumption economy, number of PET bottles that I use in a day, number of aluminum cans that I use in a day. So I would definitely want a degrowth there, because that I should be replacing with the circular economy, as Surajit said. So if I recycle more, I definitely don't need to produce that much amount of PET to be converted into bottles, or that much amount of aluminum to be converted into bottles. So maybe, 5 million tons of aluminum is enough for India if we are able to recycle the entire 5 million tons. So that is the degrowth that we should be okay with. Is my point of view. And if it's bad news, I don't think it's bad news in terms of employment. I don't think it's bad news in terms of GHG emissions. I don't think it's bad news in terms of less impact on the environment. Yeah, in the pure sense of gross domestic product, yes, I will not set up one more PET plant. I'll not set up maybe one more aluminum plant, and that is I should be okay with it.
All right.
It's more like a strategic degrowth of sorts.
Correct. And
Yeah,
you're also
yeah.
sort of supplementing the growth with other kind of growth. I'm coming to Anish with this, and I know that there were a couple of statements that were referred to specifically by Surajit, and I know that there's a lot going on. There's a Surajit, if you have anything to add there as well, in terms of circularity of how consumption patterns need to change. But Anish, coming to the specific point, is that what just transition would look like? You're not as much going to the supply side of things, but changing the demand systems in a way that even if the supply is reduced, there's enough for consumption. But and guys, for those of you in the audience who do not know, I'm a university professor, so a lot of these theoretical concepts sound very practical for me. Maybe they're too idealistic in nature, but is that what it looks like, Anish?
See, it's a very nuanced layered question, because just transition is equally there on the supply side, through the supply chain, and on the demand side. Now, if I look at the supply side, of course, if you're moving away from coal, which we will eventually do, there is a whole economy which depends on it. And maybe there is a way to do it. Maybe finally we are looking at carbon. So if you can get CCS, CCUS, or other technologies to come in, which actually allow us to use the resource which is endemic and yet achieve the climate goals, that might require a whole different technology transition, finance transition to happen in that area, which has to be looked at and supported. So that's a part of the just transition, because that not only affects the sector, but it also affects the large number of people who are there. And there is that's that dimension. Similarly, on the demand side, if you look at it, we are in the capex cycle now, right? In a major capex cycle as of now. So if at all we have to make those technology choices of using green technologies, actually the time is now. But either the technology is not ready or it is very expensive. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you're talking for just transition, then you actually have to make sure that the technology becomes available. Otherwise, we are locked in. Okay, so I think it is very, very important. It's a nuanced thing. It's not just about society. It's about how current capital is treated, how we lock in our overall the whole country into that, how we lock in industry into that. So it's a much more layered question than just saying that, okay, the coal miners or the oil, the people who work in the oil fields need to be catered to and provided for. So that's the thing. And I think that's something which is not being talked about enough as yet, because we don't do a clinical analysis of the whole cycle. We just talk about concepts and take them in isolation, each of them in isolation. Whereas what you need to do is to take a full systems view and understand what are the implications in each of those major touch points in that system, and then act on them properly. And I think, to me, that is the holistic view of just transition, rather than reducing it down to jingoism in some sense.
Ishan, if I can jump in here, I just wanted to mention, I just couldn't agree with Anish, more on this last point about the holistic approach and the lens that's required. And, as I was listening to him, just two things that immediately came to mind is the classic definition of measurability that we have come up with globally, which is, country by country, when we rank order countries on what's the carbon emission contribution of the country, it's mainly production based and not consumption based. So production based lens, when used, makes the developed world look so much better. If you start to use a consumption lens, suddenly
absolutely
the picture really completely flips.
Yeah.
So I think he's exactly right. The supply chain and the trade related emissions also need to be factored in, even if it means double counting at the larger totality planet level. It doesn't matter. But for a country that's consuming something which is produced elsewhere, you've got to factor in the not just production based emissions, but also consumption based emissions, even if it's taking place somewhere else. So all of that has to be factored in. I think that's one example that came to mind. And the other example to illustrate and support Anisha's point that came to mind was this example of Shell. And some of you might remember, Shell Incubator, had this initiative once where they, in order to do some sustainability efforts, they were recycling, as a part of the whole circular economy thing. They were recycling lithium-ion batteries, and they were shipping it between Africa and Belgium. And only later they realized the amount they were spending in the shipment costs was causing as much carbon emission as they were trying to save by recycling the lithium-ion batteries. So I think that's just another, the being, I think Anish is absolutely bang on. A totalitarian or a holistic approach is absolutely essential. And I think we need to be smarter than what we are today as a world. And I think the countries together and the cast of characters that are influencing this happening in the world, I think do need to take that into account and figure out a way to make people look at things holistically. And I don't have the answer yet on how to do that.
I think that's the reason behind this panel discussion. I think a lot of those answers are still to be found. So Rajiv, was there something that you were mentioning? I thought that you had something to say, did you?
Well, I agree with all my fellow panelists. I think they have covered the length and breadth of this discussion very well. I just wanted to add just 2 points. One was, I think, something very nicely, what Abhishek articulated, that we should look at China. And what really intrigues me is that in 2003, 2004, China actually was looking at the circular economy policies that we are today struggling with and are still in the draft stage. Now, all their acquisitions across the board, and if you read The Economist and, magazines such as that, which tell you, how they're looking at minerals throughout the globe, be it in Latin America, in Africa, all that started in 2003. We have just now started talking about it. That's just number one. Number two is now we have the elephant in the room. We have America in the Paris Agreement, and that has completely changed. I'll tell you how it has changed. Just 2 days ago, I was discussing on carbon capture and storage. I keep some interest in, how this world is also evolving. And the US government is giving a $50 tax credit on carbon and capture storage projects. And let us say, you know, what's happening in Europe with respect to the border tax they're coming up with on carbon, that if you wanted to say, sell steel, iron and steel to Europe, you need to have a certain carbon footprint benchmark, right? So what the Indian steel manufacturers are looking at, let us see if there are 6 blast furnaces, and as you know, blast furnaces are slightly older technology. So maybe 1 or 2 of them, you know, they are going to sort of, you know, reject with carbon capture and storage. Now, that is where the reality of it is going. And there's a question in the chat box I thought I would answer in the same breath. And that's a fantastic question. You know,
sure.
I think the question is that, oh, it's great that, like, you know, investors are asking this question in the Western world, what exactly is happening in India. You see where, at least I see, and you know, you all can comment, and where the transformation is happening in every sector, including the power sector possibly, is that, you know, the investors are asking the questions to the very large guys, and then they are passing it on to the supply chain. And then once this practice is becoming like a good practice and it is entering the national economy, then the regulator is quickly changing the laws. And this is happening at real time. Okay. So to answer the question, how, let us say if someone was not part of the supply chain of a very large corporate, sooner or later, the regulation is going to come and hit them, you know. Yeah. But as we see, most of, you know, the manufacturing sector today is getting oriented towards the supply chains. And those, you know, are going to be heavily, you know, be required to transform to low carbon, to circular use of materials, remanufacturing, and so on and so forth. That's a reality. I thought I just add these points. I agree with all my panelists. Excellent points for everyone.
Absolutely.
Anish, did you have something to add there?
So no, not exactly on that. I think the only point which I wanted to add was also a part to Abhishek's point about when he said that there are 3 categories of companies. I would add a 4th category of organization, which actually fundamentally relooks at what they make, not how they make. Okay, how they make or sell, whether they're carbon neutral is also but what they make. Okay, and I think this has now become, it's no longer a good to ask question. It's an existential question, because if you are just like the thermal power plant guys, you know, if they make something, they're actually going to lose value in the market. And if it's a listed company and they're making the next thermal power plant, they're going to lose value. So for a power company, it's actually dumb to invest more in thermal power plants. Okay.
Right.
Similarly, that will come across the industry, and somewhere the industry has to not only ask about how we are making something, how we are selling, how efficient we are in terms of carbon, water, everything, to the question on the chat, but also what are we making? That's a very, very fundamental question. Soon, retail investors will also start asking it. I think it's retail investors catch up, maybe with a little lag, but they do catch up, and soon they'll start asking because they fundamentally care for their money. If they see that this is where they're going to lose money, then they're actually going to ask that question.
If I may add, Anish, thanks. If I add 2 examples here, you know, one from Anglo American, you would know, of course, global company, global investors. They, you know, given the pressure from the investors, they are actively divesting all coal assets and selling them off. But you know, I just felt that it is more like, you know, let me, you know, survive myself as a company while there will be somebody else who will still be digging that coal. Right, so that is the answer that they had, and
basically laying your carbon footprint onto someone else.
Yeah, on someone else, and you know, they have a flourishing diamond business, platinum business, so it's not something which they are worried about, and it's just selling off their coal mines. I'll give the second example of our own Coal India Limited. You know, your core company, which is, you know, digging out that coal. And their answer is you know, of course, the answer is still being formulated, but their answer is very, very different. It's like coal will get used to make power. We know that this will be an issue. So I should get into businesses which, you know, consume a lot of power. Hence, that will be like a, you know, captive demand for me to dig out that coal and consume that coal and produce that power. And so I should get into aluminum business, because aluminum smelting is like super high power consumption. I will, you know, then, and that is what defines my business stability. So my point is that, we are not thinking it right, that do we have the right end goal in mind? If the end goal is currently just survival of the firm as we used to define as is, I don't think that is the right end goal to use. And which is where I would also maybe, and again, you might call it an outdated thought, but in 50s or whatever, we didn't have much of industry, and it was the government who actually spent money in building up industries. Now many of these technologies are untested. Private sector will not immediately invest money given the short term pressures of showing a quarterly result to an investor. So for example, if hydrogen is a technology, we know it's untested, we know it's not going to be like a bumper hit if a private company invests into it. So maybe the government does it, and maybe or government does it with underwriting some bit of risk from the private sector to actually do it. Because the answers, and of course Coal India Limited or Anglo American are exceptional examples. There are companies, Surajit was mentioning on the blast furnace, there are like ArcelorMittal is thinking not to set up a blast furnace based capacity at all in India. They are looking at other options, or which it could be hydrogen or it could be electric arc furnace. Even China is now saying that in 10 years we will transition 30-40% of our capacity to electric arc furnace, so that we are just burning, we are using renewable power only, and not you're cooking coal for making steel. So but you have these examples of Anglo and Coal India taking such decisions which really don't make sense in the 10-year, 20-year, 30-year time frame, but of course they make sense for them now, which I think is again the lack of the incentive to do the long-term right thing, rather than just managing a short-term, a 3-year, 5-year time horizon.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said about having the right priorities, as you've pointed out, Abhishek. I think we're running out of time now. So unless Ishan, you want to add anything, or if anybody in the panel wants to add anything.
Yeah, I'll open it up to the panelists for their concluding remarks, if any. Obviously, no pressure. Before I address a question that has come in from Mr. Arjun Sinha Roy. So, Mr. Roy, my personal apologies. We do not have any time to take that question up. But in all honesty, greenwashing is something that we wish to discuss. Hopefully, your question motivates us to conduct another panel discussion with the global stalwarts that I've been referring to, and we can get them together again to discuss some of the points that we have raised in the questions, and some of the other points that need to be elucidated upon in part 2 of the series. Hopefully, that'll come soon.
Or perhaps it could also be touched upon a little bit in the closing statements, if possible.
Yes. So, if there are any concluding remarks, closing remarks, I know there's a lot to be done. I know it's a sort of a clean slate, but also a filled up slate. So there's again the dichotomy that I referred to earlier.
Sure. So Surajit, do you want to go ahead first?
Yeah. So I think first of all, Arpit had some very, very nice questions, and I quickly will answer.
Sure, please. Thank you.
One was on the goalposts, that regulatory goalposts are changing, compliance goalposts are changing. Second was on industry associations and what are how they can be helping this entire process. And the last was, if around 80% of your impacts lie outside your manufacturing, then how do you exactly go about doing this? I'll quickly answer. See, the goalpost changing and the industry association bit are connected. See, today, if industry doesn't get the right science-based approach that is being taken by the rest of the world, and when I say science-based approach, which is based on life cycle analysis and things like that, which are sophisticated tools which are used, for getting to the right decisions about from policymakers' point of view. So the engagement between industry and the government through industry associations is happening very, very constructively today. And also educating the stakeholders, even when a law has come out, to be able to correctly interpret it for them. Because while a particular state can change the goalpost all of a sudden, which is probably at loggerheads with what the national law is, creates a sort of a knee-jerk kind of reaction which permeates throughout the industry. So the industry is today getting together very, very concertedly. They want to do the right thing, but they also do not want that to impact business to the extent that you can't do any work in that state, right? And the second part was, this is a fantastic question again. So the interaction with the supply chain has become enormous. With respect to, let us say, if you talk about carbon, the kind of emission factors that you can use, the local emission factors rather than a global one. In order to do that, if you look at sustainable agriculture, if you look at packaging, huge opportunities of looking at the recycled content of the material, as well as the energy efficiency that can come and the renewable energy piece that can come. So if you have to look at decarbonizing, and that's how the modeling comes in and analytics with it. So if that is done up to 2050, this requires tremendous mathematical, sort of modeling and consensus of a number of stakeholders, including the supply chain, how they are going to be investing, and maybe help them with the green bonds and things like that over a period of time to make the transition. I think I'll save the time for other speakers. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Wonderful being with you all.
Yeah. Swati, do you want to come up next?
Sure. Instead of giving closing remarks, I thought I could maybe use my closing remarks time to address the question the student brought up on the greenwashing. So I would address that by saying that whenever such forces are at play and the demand is being created by market forces, then there is a secular trend and pace of evolution that happens for the players in the ecosystem. And, or in this case, the private sector, which is the focus of conversation, will follow a certain pace of evolution on sustainability efforts. If the market forces were at play, and let's say that's a secular trend and the pace is X. Now, if you put in regulatory mechanisms on top as a layer and provide that extra nudge to hasten that pace, it's natural for some greenwashing to start happening, because now you're kind of putting that artificial mechanisms and forcing mechanisms. So it's kind of like, teachers forcing you to do something, you'll try and work around it, kind of a thing. So there is always a likelihood of some % of greenwashing that is bound to happen. And I think we shouldn't get dissuaded by that. To me, we should just take that as a price to pay for doing business. And when I say business, I'm talking about the business of getting sustainability to happen. So it's a price to pay, and we should factor that in.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Swati. I was saying that it is also a reflection of where the industry is now heading, that you have to appear to be green. So maybe it's also a signal to the right direction as well.
Absolutely. It's also the pressure they're feeling. And I think you see a lot more of it in consumer sector companies for obvious reasons, because they are feeling the pressure to appear a certain way, to have a certain image and maintain that image in front of their customers and consumers. Lesser so in B2B. So I think, I don't have any data to support my point, but I think to us laymen, I think it's more evident. We see more of it happening in the consumer space.
No, thank you for that pragmatic and yet somewhat positive perspective on where we are headed. So thanks, Swati. Anish, do you want to come in?
So I'll just take the shifting goalpost point a little bit.
Sure.
I think goalposts will shift. There's no way to avoid shifting goalposts, because you don't even know whether we are headed for 1.5 degrees, whether we are headed for 2 degrees, and whether we are headed for 3 degrees. Each of them have a very different response, right? So and the consequences of each of them are very, very different. So as a consequence, goalposts will shift. The best thing for industry to do is to stay ahead, significantly in their thinking and action, so that they have space for accommodating some of the shifting goalposts. Otherwise, you will always fall behind. It's not easy, but it is something as a philosophy the boards have to drive. This discussion has to shift to the boards. The strategic thinking has to come from the boards rather than the chief sustainability officer or even the CEO. I think that whole field has shifted quite a bit, and the philosophy also has to shift.
Absolutely. I think just coming from the board would make a lot more difference than we were having this little discussion about HRs being placed as sustainability officers. That was obviously a trend earlier, but then I absolutely agree. It's going to be the boards that'll make the difference. Abhishek, over to you.
Yeah. So maybe I think I will just close soon. I think I totally agree with Anish that the goalpost will keep on shifting, and you need to stay ahead. I think But coming from my experience, I would say 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I think we had thought of that digitization or digital is like the next big topic, and it was almost like a focus that we know that every company will go through a digital transformation journey over the next 5-7 years, and that was our focus in terms of developing our business, also our capability, so that we could support our clients. I think the entire sustainability climate change topic is at that cusp now. So and we are also taking it at that level, that we know that every company will ask that question, because they are being asked those questions either from the investors or from the consumers or from XYZ. So it is something which will be which will remain as a topic, and as Anish said, the board or the CEO or even if it's one individual who's there as a CEO, I think that also can drive change in one organization to actually focus on get focus on this topic and integrate the private sector into this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your closing comments, Abhishek. And with this, we come to an end of this really interesting discussion. It surprises me how much ground we can cover in a period of an hour or hour 15 minutes. I think being able to explore a lot of deep and nuanced aspects of it, and a lot of it remaining, of course. And I hope that we get the opportunity to get all four of the speakers with us again. But thank you so much, Surajit, Swati, Anish, and Abhishek, for joining us. And it was an absolute pleasure interacting with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody in the audience for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone in the audience.
Thank
I'd
you.
also like to thank
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Joined us on LinkedIn. Thank you for your support, and we will be taking up your questions at a separate time. Please do check out the GPODS website, and yeah, please do keep in touch. And thank you for all the wonderful discussions, panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye.